Hi there, this is Pehal Verma and today we are going to read this chapter, Alternative Centers of Power. Now what happened after the disintegration of the USSR was that it became clear that alternative centers of political and economic power could limit America's dominance. Now there were three alternative centers of power other than US and Russia which could limit the dominance of US. These three economic powers or political powers were European Union first, second Southeast Asian nations, that is ASEAN, and the third was China itself. Now we are going to answer only 5 questions in this chapter, and these 5 questions are: there were 3 alternative centers of power other than the US or Russia. The first was European Union, ASEAN and China. Alright. Now there are 5 questions which arise in this chapter regarding these 3 superpowers. These are: what are they, how were they formed, and what are their objectives. Now these 3 questions can be called its definition. Next question which arises is how they pose a threat to US dominance, means how much their powers are and how can they pose a threat to US dominance, and what are their relations with India. So only these 5 questions are there in this chapter which we are going to see, and let's start the chapter. So the first alternative center of power was European Union. After the Second World War came to an end, many of Europe's leaders grappled with the question of Europe. After the Second World War, many of the leaders of Europe were very worried about the question of Europe, that should Europe be allowed to revert to its old rivalries or be reconstructed on principles and institutions that would contribute to a positive conception of international relations. That means they were trapped in a state of confusion where they had two choices. Either they could remain disintegrated and distributed between small countries, and their old rivalries would continue, or the other option was they would create their system based on principles and institutions that would contribute to the positive conception of the international relations. So what they did was, in 1945 the European states confronted the ruin of their economies. As we all know, after the Second World War all the world economies went down. So similarly Europe's economy also went down. Now European integration after 1945 was aided by the Cold War. America extended massive financial help for reviving Europe's economy under that was called the Marshall Plan. Now what was this Marshall Plan? After the Second World War the European economy went down, but because of the Cold War America extended massive financial help for West European countries, and this was called the Marshall Plan. The US also created a new collective security structure under NATO. This we have read in the first chapter also. And under the Marshall Plan, the Organization for European Economic Cooperation OEEC was established in 1948, so that there were made channels to aid the West European states. Now how US helped the European states? It created an organization called the OEEC, which was established in 1948. It became a forum where the Western European states began to cooperate on trade and economic issues with US. The Council of Europe, established in 1949. This was a step forward in a political cooperation. Now what they did for political cooperation, the European Union, they made a Council of Europe. Now for economic integration, they formed an European Economic Community in 1957. What they did for economic integration? They created a European Economic Community in 1957. Now this process acquired a political dimension with the creation of the European Parliament. The collapse of the Soviet bloc put Europe on a fast track and resulted in the establishment of the European Union in 1992. Now, after the collapse of the Soviet bloc, they rapidly created and established the European Union in 1992. So, when was the European Union formed? It was formed in 1992. The European Union has evolved over time from an economic union to an increasingly political one. Now, earlier the main objective of the European Union was for economic benefits of Europe, but now they have become a political union which keeps its matters in the international arena. The European Union has started to act more as a nation state. They are called a nation state because they have tried to make a constitution of European Union which has failed. We will read about this further in the chapters. Constitution for the European Union have failed. It has its own flag, anthem, founding date and currency. It also has some form of a common foreign and security policy. Now these are these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 factors which make European Union a nation state like country. As you can see the European Union flag, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 stars in the center. These 12 stars represent the 12 countries which are under the European Union. Next up is the European Union map. These are the old members which are demarcated by purple, and these are the new members which are demarcated by blue. So how many countries are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 and 15. There are 15 countries. Now this is the old flag. As you can see, there are only 12 stars in the the flag of European Union. They may have upgraded the European flag afterwards. We will see about it later. Now, how is the European Union influential in the world? The Europe has economic, political and diplomatic and military influence. Now this line right here is very important according to your exam weightage, exam questions or boards. It is a very important line. Do learn this question and the answer. I am going to answer this question right here. So the answer to this is, how is the European Union an economic influencer? The EU is the world's biggest economy with a GDP of more than $12 trillion in 2005, slightly larger than that of the United States. Its currency, the euro, can pose a threat to the dominance of the US dollar. This is the second point of economic influence. The third point is, its share of world trade is 3 times larger than that of the United States. Now these are just facts and figures. You have to learn them or understand them. If you read it for several times and you will automatically learn this question. Now its economic power gives its influence over its closest members as well as in Asia and Africa. It also functions as an important bloc in international affairs, economic organizations such as World Trade Organization. Now this was the economic influence. Next is the political and diplomatic influence of European Union. 2 members of the EU, Britain and France, have holded permanent seats on the US Security Council. As we know, there are 5 countries which hold permanent seats in the United Nations Security Council. 2 among them, that is Britain and France, are a part of European Union. The European Union includes several non-parliament members of the UNSC too. This has enabled the EU to influence some US policies, such as the US position on Iran's nuclear program. Now here is this word written current. Now this issue is not current at all, it is somewhat around 2015 issue. So don't use this word current if you write this example. The last point for this is its use of diplomacy, economic investments and negotiations rather than coercion and military force has been effective, as in the case of its dialogue with China on human rights and environmental degradation. This is another example of its political and diplomatic influence. Now, militarily, the EU's combined armed forces are the second largest in the world, first being the US. Its total spending on defense is second after the US. Obviously, it is the second after US because the US is the dominant power. Two European Union member states, Britain and France, also have nuclear arsenals of approximately 550 nuclear warheads. It is also the world's second most important source of space and communications technology. Now this is its power militarily. As a supranational organization, the EU is able to intervene in economic, political and social areas, but its member states have their own foreign relations and defense policies that are often at odds with each other. Now, though this European Union is a combined force, but their nation states at times at many areas have their own different perspectives, their own different views, their own different foreign relations and defense policies, which contradicts the fact that European Union works simultaneously. Now there are so many examples about this. You can read this paragraph by your own, it's very easy to understand. Alright, so the next superpower, or you can say next organization, alternative center of power, is Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Alright, we'll see the map right here. So these are the South Asian countries. Here is Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Australia is not a part of ASEAN. Here is Myanmar and Bangladesh. These are some of the members of ASEAN. Now we'll read about ASEAN. Before and during the Second World War, this region of Asia suffered the economic and political consequences of repeated colonialism, both European and Japanese. Now this area was under colonialism before and during the Second World War. Alright. So what were the problems which they had? They had problems of nation building, they were struck in poverty, economic backwardness, pressure to align with one great power. So these were their problems. This was a recipe for conflict, which the countries of Southeast Asia could ill afford. Efforts at Asian and Third World unity such as Bandung Conference and the non-alignment movement were ineffective in establishing the conventions for informal cooperation and interactions. Now this Bandung Conference was not very worthful for them to create an convention for informal cooperation. Now they could not cooperate with each other with the non-alignment movement or third world unity. They couldn't do it. So what they did was they established the Association for Southeast Asian Nations. ASEAN was established in 1967 by 5 countries of this region: Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore and Thailand, by signing the Bangkok Declaration. Bangkok is in Thailand, as we all know. The objectives of ASEAN were primarily to accelerate economic growth and through that social progress and cultural development. Now these were the objectives of ASEAN. Another objective of ASEAN was to promote regional peace and stability. Later on, the members of ASEAN increased and they became 10. Now there was an ASEAN way, a form of interaction that is informal, non-confrontationist and cooperative. They created another way of cooperation, a different way of cooperation which was not followed in the world before. The respect for national sovereignty is critical to the functioning of ASEAN. That means they respect the national sovereignty of each nation. They do not intervene in matters of different countries. They just create a cooperation and institution so that they can come and meet and discuss some political issues. In 2003, ASEAN moved along the path of EU by agreeing to establish an ASEAN community comprising three pillars. Now in 2003, they disrespected their ASEAN way and they started to move forward on the path of EU, that is European Union. They created three pillars or three institutions that were ASEAN Security Community, ASEAN Economic Community and ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community. This is very important question. Next up was the ASEAN Regional Forum, which was established in 1994. Is the organization that carries out coordination of security and foreign policy. Now they created a forum after making the three pillars in 2003. They created this forum in way more earlier, and while the ASEAN region as a whole is a much smaller economy compared to US and EU and Japan, its economy is growing much faster than all of these. That means the growth rate of this economy is much higher than that of US, EU and Japan. Now what were their economic objectives? Their economic objectives were to create a common market and production base within ASEAN states to aid social and economic development in the region, to improve the existing ASEAN dispute settlement mechanism to resolve economic disputes, and creating a free trade area FTA for investment, labor and services. These were the economic objectives of the ASEAN. Its Vision 2020 has defined an outward looking role for ASEAN in the international community. During the Cold War years, Indian foreign policy did not pay adequate attention to ASEAN. Now here are the relations of India with ASEAN. Earlier they did not pay much attention to ASEAN, but in recent years India has tried to make amendments. It has signed FTAs with two ASEAN members, that is Singapore and Thailand. It is trying to sign an FTA with ASEAN itself. So here is the end of ASEAN. Now we are going to look at the third alternative center of power, that is China. As we all know, China is a superpower itself. So China's economic success since 1978 has been linked to its rise as a great power. China has risen into a great power after 1978. It is projected to overtake the US as the world's largest economy by 2040, and you won't believe right now in 2020 China is the world's largest economy and US is on the second. You won't believe it, you Google it, you check it, it is the truth. Now what happened in 1978 is China introduced reforms in its countries for better development. We are going to look at it in detail. The strength of its economy, together with other factors such as population, landmass, resources, regional location and political influence. More than this, there are more factors which influence, like influence in the regional affairs. After the interception of the People's Republic of China in 1949, its economy was based on the Soviet model. After 1949, when China became independent, its economy was based on the Soviet model, that is, it was mainly based on socialism and social welfare. China chose to sever its links with the capitalist world. It had no link with the capitalist world. It used the strategy to hide from the dominance and everything. The model was now, after the Soviet Union Now what happened? It had a little choice. It had a little choice but to fall back on its own resources for a brief period on Soviet aid and advice. It it falled back on Soviet aid because it was a poor country with large population. The model was to create a state-owned heavy industry sector from the capital accumulated from agriculture. Now what they did was earlier in their 5-year plans, they used the capital accumulated from agriculture to invest in heavy industry sector. So what this did was they made their secondary sector much stronger. China decided to substitute imports by domestic goods. Alright, so they reduced their imports from other countries and replaced it with domestic goods. This model allowed China to use its resources to establish the foundations of an industrial economy on a scale that did not exist before. Now this helped them in development. Employment and social welfare was assured to all citizens. China moved ahead of most developing countries in educating its citizens and ensuring better health for them. The rate of growth was 5 to 6% and annual growth was 2 to 3% in population, meant an economic growth was insufficient to meet the needs of the growing people. But this 2 to 3% of annual growth was much less for them. So what they did was its industrial production was also not growing, international trade was minimal and per capita income was very low. So what they did was the Chinese leadership took major policy decisions in the 1970s. As I told, they implemented reforms in 1978. China ended its political and economic isolation with the establishment of relations with the United States in 1972. Now what they did was they created relations with United States in 1972. Premier Zhou Enlai proposed 4 modernizations: agriculture, industry, science and technology and military. So what he did was by 1978 the then leader Deng Xiaoping announced the open door policy and economic reforms in China. The policy was to generate higher productivity by investments of capital and technology from abroad. So now they opened up their economy a little bit, they opened up their markets a little bit. Chinese did not go for the shock therapy but opened their economy step by step. As we have seen earlier in this book, the European countries, what they did was they went for the shock therapy. They suddenly changed their whole system to a privatized system. But what China did, it moved step by step, piece by piece. In China, the state played and continues to play a central role in setting up a market economy. They made a mix of capitalism and socialism. Here the state plays a major role in making up the market economy, but the investments are from abroad. So they made a mix of socialism and capitalism. While the Chinese economy has improved dramatically, not everyone in China has received the benefits of the reforms. Now there were some drawbacks of the reforms too. 100 million people looking for jobs were unemployed. Female employment and conditions of work were as bad as that were in Europe of 18th and 19th centuries. Environmental degradation and corruption were at a spike. Now China has become an economic power to reckon with. As I have already told you, China is right now the world's largest economic power. Now what are the relations of India and China? We'll finish this very fast. India and China were great powers in Asia before the advent of Western imperialism. They were great powers, they are still great powers, and there are limited political and cultural interaction between the two. There is very limited interaction between the two countries. There was one slogan, once at a time, Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, was very popular. But soon after independence, both states were involved in differences arising from the Chinese takeover of Tibet in 1950. Now we have seen these conflicts many times. We know about them many times. There is this, China occupied part of India, which we are, hearing so many newses about them too. I'll talk about these in detail in another video. So stay tuned. China and India were involved in a border conflict in 1962 over competing territorial claims, principally in Arunachal Pradesh and in the Aksai Chin region of Ladakh. Now, what was the conflict? China claimed to India that a part of Arunachal Pradesh and the Aksai Chin region of Ladakh was earlier a part of China, which came into India. So they fought against India in the war of 1962 uh, to get the annexation of these areas. The conflict of 1962, in which India suffered military reverses, had a long-term implication for India-China relations. A series of talks to resolve the border issue were initiated in 1981. Now there have been cooperation too. Earlier we have read about the conflicts between India and China. Now we are going to read about cooperation between India and China. Bilateral trade between India and China has increased from $338 million in 1992 to more than $18 billion in 2006. Both countries have agreed to cooperate with each other in areas that could otherwise create conflict between the two, such as bidding of energy deals abroad. India and China have adopted similar policies in international economic institutions like the World Trade Organization. This is the cooperation between the two. Since then, both governments have taken measures to contain conflict and maintain peace and tranquility on the border. Indian and Chinese leaders and officials visit Beijing and New Delhi with greater frequency. Both sides are now becoming more familiar with each other. Increasing transportation, communication links, common economic interests, and global concerns should help establish a more positive and a sound relationship. Now here is a case study about Japan. It is very easy to understand. You can read it on your own and it's not very important. So thank you for watching the video. Like, comment, subscribe if you have any queries, and do watch my wait for my another video. Thank you.